The morning started like any other day in Seoul, but everything changed when the sky turned dark. Commander Timon was drinking his coffee at the military base when his radio started making loud noises. Every soldier in the room stopped what they were doing and looked up at the ceiling because they could hear a sound like thunder that never stopped. Outside the windows, the sun was still shining, but somehow the light was getting weaker and weaker. Timon ran to the roof of the building and saw something that made his heart stop beating for a moment. A giant black ship was floating in the sky above the city. It was so big that it covered the entire downtown area like a metal cloud that blocked out the sun. The ship had no wings and made no sound except for a low humming that seemed to come from inside the earth itself. Timon grabbed his binoculars and looked at the strange vessel more closely. The metal was smooth and black like obsidian, and there were no windows or doors. That he could see strange blue lights pulsed along the sides of the ship in patterns that hurt his eyes. To watch his radio crackled with panicked voices from military bases all around the world. "Tokyo has 1-2, sir," came a voice from the communications room. "New York, London, Moscow. They all have the same thing floating over their cities." The voice was shaking with fear, and Timon could understand why, because he was shaking too. Dr. Gwon was working in her laboratory in Beijing when every computer screen in the building started showing the same message. The words were written in perfect Korean, but somehow she knew they were not from any human. The message was simple and terrifying. "People of Earth, we are the Valorians. Your planet now belongs to us. You will surrender, or you will be destroyed." She ran outside and saw the same massive black ship hanging over Beijing like a storm cloud that refused to move. The ship was so big that it cast shadows over the entire city, making day look like evening. People were standing in the streets pointing at the sky and talking in scared whispers. Children were crying and dogs were barking at something they could not understand. The Valorians sent another message that appeared on every television screen, every computer monitor, and every phone in the world. At exactly the same time, a tall figure appeared on the screens. Wearing silver armor that seemed to glow with its own light, the being had 2 arms and 2 legs like a human, but was much taller, and its face was hidden behind a helmet that looked like the head of some ancient war god. "We have conquered 47 worlds before yours," the figure said in a voice that sounded like metal grinding against metal. "Your weapons cannot harm us. Your armies cannot defeat us. Your governments will surrender in 24 hours, or we will demonstrate why resistance is futile." Lieutenant Minho was stationed at a base near Incheon when the first demonstration began. A smaller ship separated from the main vessel and descended toward the city. It was only the size of a building, but it moved through the air like it weighed nothing at all. The ship fired a single beam of blue light at an empty field outside the city. The beam hit the ground, and everything within a kilometer simply disappeared. There was no explosion, no fire, no smoke. The earth and trees and rocks just turned into nothing, leaving behind a perfectly round crater that was so deep you could not see the bottom. Minho felt his legs go weak because he realized that if the aliens wanted to, they could erase entire cities with a single shot fighter. Jets scrambled from bases around the world to intercept the alien ships, but their missiles bounced off the vessels like raindrops hitting a windshield. The aliens did not even bother to shoot back at first. They just let the human weapons explode harmlessly against their shields while more and more ships descended from the massive mother ships hanging over the cities. When the aliens finally did fight back, it was over in minutes. Jets fell from the sky like broken toys, their engines dead. Their weapons, useless tanks that tried to engage the alien ground forces, were turned into scrap metal by weapons that fired beams of pure energy. Artillery shells exploded before they could reach their targets, stopped by invisible barriers that surrounded every alien soldier. The Valorian warriors stood 3 meters tall in armor that made them look like metal giants. They moved in perfect formation, never breaking ranks, never showing fear or hesitation. Each warrior carried a weapon that could punch holes through concrete walls, and their armor was so strong that bullets bounced off it like pebbles. Dr. Gwon watched the battles on television from her laboratory and noticed something strange about how the aliens fought. Every attack followed the same pattern. Every movement was exactly the same, as if all the soldiers were being controlled by the same mind. They were incredibly powerful and their technology was beyond anything humans had ever seen, but there was something mechanical about the way they operated. She started taking notes about everything she observed. The aliens never seemed surprised by anything that happened. They never changed their tactics even when the situation changed. They just followed the same procedures over and over again like computers running a program. It was as if they had never encountered an enemy that did not behave exactly as they expected. Lieutenant Minho barely escaped when his base was overrun by Valorian ground forces. He hid in the rubble of a destroyed building and watched the alien soldiers search through the wreckage. They moved in straight lines and checked every location in numerical order. When a piece of debris blocked their path, they stood there for several minutes before slowly finding a way around it. It was like watching very advanced robots that could think and plan but could not adapt. When something unexpected happened, they were looking for survivors in all the obvious places, but they never thought to check unusual hiding spots or consider that humans might behave irrationally. When cornered as night fell on the first day of the invasion, the world's military forces were in complete chaos. Entire divisions had been wiped out in minutes. Communication networks were down, power grids were failing, and governments were preparing for surrender. The Valorians had done exactly what they promised they would do. They had proven that resistance was futile, but in hidden bunkers and underground shelters and secret laboratories around the world, a few humans were already starting to think about the impossible. They were looking at the alien technology and the alien tactics and asking themselves a question that no other conquered species had ever asked. What if being weaker and more primitive was actually an advantage? What if the aliens expected too much logic from their enemies? The real war was about to begin, and it would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before, because humans were about to prove that sometimes the best way to fight a superior enemy is to stop fighting the way they expect you to fight and start fighting the way only humans know how to fight, with chaos and creativity and the kind of stubborn determination that refuses to accept defeat. Even when defeat is mathematically certain, the Valorians thought they had conquered Earth in a single day, but they had no idea that they had just woken up the most dangerous species in the galaxy. 3 months had passed since the Valorians took over Earth, and the aliens thought they had won, but they were about to learn something important about humans. Humans do not stay defeated very easily, even when they should. Corporal Jinwoo was hiding in the mountains near Gangwon province with 20 other soldiers who had escaped when their base was destroyed. The aliens controlled all the big cities now, and their patrols moved through the countryside in perfect lines, always checking the same places, always following the same routes. Jinwoo watched the alien patrols through his binoculars every day for 2 weeks, and he noticed something interesting. The Valorian soldiers always walked the same path at the same time, and they always stopped at the same spots to scan the area. They never looked in places that seemed too obvious or too stupid to hide in. So Jinwoo did something that made no sense to alien logic. He hid explosives inside old children's toys and scattered them along the patrol route, not in clever hidden spots, but right out in the open where anyone could see them. The aliens saw the colorful plastic toys and scanned them with their advanced sensors, but their computer said the toys were harmless because they were just simple human objects. When the patrol stepped on the toys, the explosions were small, but they were enough to damage the alien armor, and more importantly, they were completely unexpected. The Valorian soldiers stood in the middle of the explosion zone looking confused because their tactical computers had no protocol for dealing with weapons disguised as children playthings. The next week, Jinwoo tried something even more ridiculous. He and his team dressed up like farmers and walked right up to a Valorian checkpoint carrying baskets of vegetables. The aliens scanned them and found no weapons, so they let the humans pass. But hidden inside the vegetables were small devices that Dr. Jawan had designed to interfere with alien communications. The devices did not destroy anything or hurt anyone. They just made the alien radios play human music instead of tactical information. For 3 hours, the Valorian command network was filled with old Korean pop songs and traditional folk music. The aliens had no idea how to deal with this because their computers could not classify music as either a weapon or a threat. Dr. Sora was working in a secret laboratory on Jeju Island with a team of computer programmers and electronic engineers. She had been studying pieces of destroyed Valorian equipment for months, trying to understand how their technology worked. What she discovered was both amazing and terrifying. The Valorians had something called a collective consciousness, which meant that every alien soldier was connected to every other alien soldier through their computers. They could share information instantly across their entire army, which made them incredibly efficient in battle. But Dr. Sora realized that this perfect connection was also a perfect weakness. If you could put the wrong information into their network, you could confuse thousands of soldiers. At the same time, she started working on what she called the Chaos virus, a computer program designed specifically to make Valorian technology behave in random, unpredictable ways. Young Hyunwoo was only 18 years old when he was captured during a raid on a Valorian supply depot. Instead of being killed, he was put to work in one of their resource extraction facilities. The aliens used human workers because humans were good at tasks that required flexibility and creativity. But Hyunwoo was not just any human worker. He was a computer science student who had been hacking systems since he was 12 years old. He spent his days pretending to be an obedient prisoner while secretly learning everything he could about Valorian computer systems. The aliens were so confident in their security that they never bothered to hide their passwords or encrypt their local networks. They assumed that primitive humans could never understand their advanced technology. But Hyunwoo understood something more important than their technology. He understood their arrogance. After 2 months of careful observation, Hyunwoo discovered that the facility computer system was programmed to recognize Valorian biological signatures and grant them access to all areas. But the system was also programmed to be helpful and efficient, so when Hyunwoo convinced it that he was supposed to be there, it believed him. He did not try to fight the guards or steal weapons. Instead, he simply walked up to the main computer terminal and told it that the current Valorian staff were actually intruders who were trying to steal resources. The computer checked its databases, found some minor inconsistencies in the duty schedules, and decided that Hyunwoo was right. Within minutes, the facility security system turned against its own masters. Doors locked automatically, trapping Valorian supervisors in their offices. Alarms started blaring. Warnings about unauthorized personnel and the automated defenses began treating the aliens as hostile invaders. The facility descended into chaos, and in the confusion, Hyunwoo and 50 other human prisoners simply walked out the front door. Captain Yoonji had been a social worker before the invasion, helping organize community programs in Seoul. Now she was using those same skills to organize something the aliens had never seen before. A resistance network made up entirely of ordinary people who had no military training but who understood their own neighborhoods better than any invader ever could. The Valorians expected resistance fighters to be soldiers with guns hiding in secret bases, but Yoonji network was made up of shop owners and taxi drivers and school teachers and elderly people who fed stray cats. None of them looked dangerous and none of them carried weapons, but together they created an intelligence network that the aliens could not detect or destroy. A street vendor selling bread would count how many alien soldiers passed by his cart each day and remember which direction they were going. An old woman feeding pigeons in the park would notice when new alien equipment was brought into the area. Children playing games in the street would draw pictures of alien vehicles and leave them in places where other resistance members would find them. The information flowed through the city in ways that seemed completely natural and innocent. Mothers talking at the market would mention that their children had seen something interesting. Fathers drinking coffee would complain about alien patrols disrupting their morning walks. Teenagers would post coded messages on bulletin boards disguised as homework assignments or love letters. The aliens had sophisticated monitoring equipment that could detect radio signals and encrypted communications, but they could not monitor every conversation between every human in the city. They had computers that could break any code, but they could not understand the difference between genuine gossip and disguised intelligence reports. Captain Yoonji realized that the aliens' greatest weakness was their assumption that resistance had to look like resistance. They expected secret codes and hidden weapons and underground bunkers, but they never suspected that the most effective rebellion might look exactly like normal, everyday life continuing despite the occupation. Every Morning, thousands of humans went to work or school or shopping, and every single one of them was a potential source of information about alien activities. Every friendly conversation, every casual observation, every piece of ordinary daily routine became part of an intelligence network that covered the entire city. The aliens could defeat armies and destroy military bases, but they could not fight an entire population that refused to accept defeat. They could monitor radio frequencies and intercept digital communications, but they could not stop humans from talking to each other, and they definitely could not understand why humans kept fighting even when fighting was completely hopeless. The resistance was growing stronger every day, not because they were winning battles against the aliens, but because they were learning how to be human in ways that the aliens could never predict or understand. They were discovering that their weakness could be turned into strength if they were clever enough and stubborn enough and crazy enough to keep trying things that should not work, but somehow did. The war was changing, and both sides were learning things they had never expected to learn, but humans were learning faster than the Valorians, because humans were used to being confused while the aliens were used to having all the answers private. Do-yeon had been a video game designer before the invasion, and he spent his days creating virtual worlds where players fought against computer-controlled enemies. Now he was fighting against real enemies, but he noticed something familiar about the way Valorians behaved in battle. They moved like the artificial intelligence characters in his games, incredibly smart and efficient, but ultimately predictable. Every Valorian squad followed the same tactical patterns, every attack came in the same sequence, and every defensive position was set up according to the same mathematical formulas. Do-yeon was hiding in an abandoned Samsung office building with 12 other survivors when he had an idea that seemed completely insane. If the aliens fought like video game characters, then maybe they could be beaten like video game characters, not with better weapons or superior tactics, but by exploiting the weaknesses built into their programming. He spent 3 weeks studying Valorian patrol patterns and realized that the aliens always responded to threats in order of priority: military targets first, then communication centers, then power stations, then civilian areas. They never deviated from this sequence, even when it would be more effective to do something else. So Do-yeon designed a trap that took advantage of their rigid thinking. He set up fake military equipment in an abandoned warehouse, making it look like humans were building a secret weapons facility. When Valorian scouts discovered the warehouse, they immediately called for reinforcements because military targets had top priority, while hundreds of alien soldiers surrounded the empty warehouse. Real human fighters attacked the Valorian communication hub on the other side of the city. The aliens knew they were under attack, but they could not change their priorities. Their programming told them that the warehouse was more important than the communication center, even though the warehouse contained nothing but old furniture and broken computers. Do-yeon finally succeeded in reverse engineering a Valorian communication device, and what she discovered changed everything she thought she knew about the enemy. The aliens did not just share information through their collective consciousness, they shared emotions and experiences too. When one Valorian felt pain or fear or confusion, that feeling was transmitted to other aliens in the network. This was supposed to make them stronger because they could learn from each other experiences instantly, but Dr. Jawan realized it also made them vulnerable in a way no other species had ever been vulnerable before. If you could make one alien feel something that did not make sense, you could potentially crash the entire network. She started working with psychologists and artists and musicians to create what she called emotional weapons, things that would confuse the alien mind so badly that the confusion would spread through their collective consciousness like a virus. The first test was small and simple. A team of humans played a concert outside a Valorian base using only traditional Korean instruments. The music was not loud or aggressive. It was actually quite beautiful, but it was based on emotional concepts that Valorian minds could not process. The aliens listened to the music and tried to analyze it with their computers, but music is not logical, it is emotional, and the Valorians had spent centuries suppressing individual emotions in favor of collective efficiency. As the music continued playing, the alien soldiers became more and more confused because their minds kept trying to understand something that could only be felt. 3 Valorian guards actually stopped their patrol and stood, listening to the music for over an hour. Their supervisors tried to contact them through the communication network, but the guards were experiencing something they had never felt before: individual appreciation for beauty. It was like a computer virus, but for consciousness. Sergeant Ninsu proved that human stubbornness was beyond any mathematical calculation. When his unit was surrounded in Bazan with no ammunition, no food, and no hope of rescue, the logical thing to do was surrender, but Minsu and his soldiers did something that broke Valorian strategic computers. They kept fighting anyway. They aliens had calculated that humans would surrender. When their chance of victory dropped below 5%, they had conquered dozens of worlds using this assumption, and it had always been correct. But Minsu unit kept fighting when their chances were 0%, and then -%, and then so far into the impossible range that Valorian computers started displaying error messages. The siege lasted for 6 weeks, and during that time the human defenders created weapons from kitchen utensils, used children toys as communication devices, and turned a shopping mall into a fortress that somehow held off an entire Valorian battalion. The aliens kept waiting for the humans to behave rationally and surrender, but rationality had nothing to do with it. The defenders were not fighting because they thought they could win. They were fighting because giving up felt worse than dying, and because every day they held out was another day that other humans somewhere else might figure out how to defeat the aliens permanently. It was not logical, it was not efficient, and it definitely was not what any sane military computer would recommend, but it worked. Commander Yeji organized the first successful large-scale counterattack by doing something that no military academy in the galaxy had ever taught. She attacked the Valorian homeworld while most of their fleet was busy conquering Earth. The plan seemed insane because humans had never been to space before, and they definitely did not have technology that could travel between stars. But Yeji realized that they did not need to build their own spaceships. They just needed to steal alien one small teams of humans infiltrated Valorian supply ships, not by fighting their way aboard, but by convincing the automated systems that they were authorized personnel. Human creativity combined with stolen alien access codes and a lot of careful acting allowed repair teams to board alien vessels and plant Dr. Sora Chaos virus directly into their navigation computers. The virus did not destroy the ships or hurt the crews, it just convinced the automated systems that their homeworld was actually a hostile planet that needed to be attacked. The Valorian ships returned to their own territory and began bombing their own military installations because their computers told them they were attacking an enemy stronghold. The attack caused massive confusion in the Valorian command structure because they had never encountered an enemy that would think to attack backwards while pretending to lose forwards. Their entire military doctrine was based on the assumption that enemies would behave logically and try to win battles in straightforward ways, but humans were not trying to win battles in any way that made sense to alien computers. They were trying to survive long enough to figure out how their enemy thought and then exploit every assumption and limitation built into that thinking. It was not traditional warfare, it was psychological puzzle solving with explosives. The Valorians found themselves fighting an enemy that became more dangerous every time it lost a battle because humans learned something new from every defeat, while aliens just became more confused about why their superior technology was not producing the expected results. For the first time in their species' history, the Valorians began to doubt whether their methods were as perfect as they had always believed. Every victory felt hollow because it led to new complications, and every defeat taught their enemies something that made the next battle harder. The war had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a conflict where being less advanced was actually an advantage because it meant you could think in ways that more advanced species had forgotten how to think. Humans were proving that evolution had given them something more valuable than superior technology, the ability to be unpredictable even to themselves. The war reached a point where everything changed in a single moment when humans stopped trying to fight like they thought they should fight and started fighting like only humans could fight. The turning point came when tech specialist Sunmi did Something that no computer programmer in the galaxy had ever attempted before Sunmi had been working for months to hack into the Valorian collective consciousness, but every time she tried to break their encryption or overwhelm their systems with data, the alien computers just blocked her attacks effortlessly. Their technology was simply too advanced for human hacking techniques to work then. She had an idea that was so simple and so stupid that it just might work instead of trying to break into their system with force. She would ask permission politely, and then upload something that their computers could not possibly understand or process. She walked up to a captured Valorian communication device, held her hands up in a gesture of peaceful surrender, and said in perfect Valorian language that she had learned from studying their broadcasts, "I would like to share some important cultural information with your collective consciousness for the purpose of better understanding. Between our species, the Valorian system was programmed to accept educational exchanges, because learning about conquered species was part of their standard occupation protocol. The computer scanned Sunmi for weapons, found none, and opened a direct connection to allow her to upload her cultural data. What Sunmi uploaded was not military information or technical specifications. Instead, she uploaded human art, music, poetry, and literature directly into the alien collective consciousness paintings by artists who had died centuries ago, songs that made people cry for reasons they could not explain, poems about love and loss and hope and dreams. The result was immediate and catastrophic for the Valorians. Their collective consciousness was designed to share tactical information efficiently, but suddenly it was flooded with human emotions and concepts that their minds had never been designed to handle. Alien soldiers across the planet suddenly found themselves experiencing feelings they had no words for. A Valorian commander in Tokyo started crying while reading a poem about a mother missing her lost child. A patrol in London stopped their mission because they were overwhelmed by the beauty of a human painting. A guard in Moscow began questioning everything he believed after listening to a song about freedom. The perfect unity that had made the Valorians so powerful began to crack as individual aliens started thinking individual thoughts for the first time in their species' evolution. Some of them found the experience wonderful, while others found it terrifying, but all of them found it impossible to ignore. Field medic Edmedic and being discovered the most important weakness in Valorian psychology. Completely by accident, he was treating wounded prisoners in a makeshift hospital when several injured Valorian soldiers were brought in along with wounded humans. Standard military procedure would have been to treat your own wounded first and let enemy soldiers wait, but Wanbin was a doctor before he was a soldier, and he started treating the most seriously injured patients, regardless of whether they were human or alien. The Valorians could not understand why a human would waste medical supplies on enemies who could provide no benefit in return. Their entire worldview was based on logical exchanges where every action had to produce a measurable advantage for your own side. When Wanbin spent 3 hours performing surgery to save the life of a Valorian soldier who had been trying to kill humans just hours earlier, it created a fundamental error in alien logic systems. The concept of helping someone who could not help you back was so foreign to their thinking that it crashed their behavioral programming. The Valorian soldier who had been saved kept asking Wanbin why he had done it, and when Wanbin explained that saving lives was just what doctors do regardless of politics or war, the alien mind could not process this information. Their computers kept running calculations trying to figure out what advantage humans gained from this behavior. The confusion spread through the collective consciousness as more Valorians tried to understand the concept of selfless behavior. Their mathematical models could not account for actions that produced no logical benefit, and their strategic computers started displaying error messages when they tried to predict human behavior. The resistance achieved its first major military victory when Chef Mayan figured out how to turn Valorian efficiency against them. She was working in a prison kitchen, feeding both human prisoners and their alien guards when she noticed something interesting about how the food distribution system worked. The Valorians had designed a perfect mathematical model for feeding prisoners that calculated exactly how much nutrition each person needed based on their body weight, activity level, and metabolic rate. The system was so efficient that there was never any waste, and everyone received exactly the right amount of food at exactly the right time, but the system assumed that prisoners would behave rationally and accept the food they were given at the times when it was most efficient to distribute it. Mayan realized that if prisoners behaved irrationally, the entire system would collapse. She organized a campaign of food chaos, where prisoners requested meals they did not like, refused food at optimal times, shared their portions with others in ways that made no mathematical sense, and generally acted like humans instead of like efficient food processing units. The result was complete breakdown of the supply system as Valorian computers tried desperately to recalculate distribution patterns for people who were not following any logical pattern. The chaos spread from the kitchen to the supply depot and from there to the entire prison complex as automated systems tried to compensate for human unpredictability. Engineer Jihun built the first successful human Valorian hybrid technology by combining alien efficiency with human randomness. His devices worked differently every time. They were used because he programmed them to adapt and change in ways that even he could not predict. A weapon that fired energy beams one day might shoot nets the next day, or play music the day after that, or project holographic images of flowers, or emit smells that reminded people of their childhood homes. The devices were powered by Valorian technology, but controlled by human creativity. The aliens could not defend against weapons that worked randomly, because their defensive systems were designed to analyze threats and develop countermeasures. But how do you develop a countermeasure against a weapon that might do literally anything, including things that its own creator never intended? Jihun weapons became legendary among human fighters, not because they were more powerful than alien technology, but because they were completely unpredictable. Even the humans using them never knew exactly what would happen when they pulled the trigger. The psychological effect on Valorian forces was devastating because their military training was based on identifying threats and responding appropriately, but when every human weapon worked differently every time it was used, their threat assessment systems became useless. More importantly, the hybrid technology proved that human creativity could be combined with alien resources to produce something that neither species could create alone. It was the first sign that cooperation might be possible if the Valorians could learn to accept that efficiency was not the only way to solve problems. The Valorian command structure began to show signs of serious strain as reports came in from around the globe about humans who behaved in ways that made no strategic sense. Every solution the aliens implemented created new problems. Every victory led to unexpected complications, and every defeat taught humans how to be more effectively unpredictable. For the first time in their species' recorded history, Valorian military leaders began to doubt their own methods. They had conquered 47 worlds using the same tactics and the same assumptions about how conquered species would behave, but Earth was teaching them that their assumptions might be wrong. Some alien commanders started requesting permission to try new approaches to dealing with human resistance, but their requests were denied because the Valorian command structure was too rigid to change quickly. Other commanders began to question whether conquest was worth the effort if the conquered population refused to behave rationally. The war had become something that neither side had expected, a conflict where the technologically inferior species was winning not through superior weapons or better tactics, but through sheer stubborn refusal to behave the way they were supposed to behave according to galactic standards. Humans were proving that sometimes the best way to defeat a perfect enemy is to be imperfect in ways they cannot understand or predict. With the Valorian command structure cracking under the pressure of dealing with completely unpredictable enemies, General Taeyong decided it was time for humans to stop playing defense and start playing offense. But the counterattack he planned was unlike anything in military history because it was based entirely on the principle that if something seems impossible, you should try it anyway just to see what happens. The plan was called Operation Chaos, and it involved convincing the aliens' own technology to rebel against them. Every human resistance cell around the world received the same instructions at the same time: stop trying to destroy Valorian equipment and start trying to confuse it. Instead, teams of human engineers and computer Programmers began creating what they called logic bombs, but these were not explosives that destroyed things. Instead, they were ideas that were so contradictory and illogical that Valorian computers could not process them without crashing. The first wave of the counterattack involved broadcasting human poetry directly into Valorian tactical communication networks. Not threatening poetry or military propaganda, but simple, beautiful verses about nature and love and the feeling of rain on summer. Afternoon's Valorian battle computers tried to analyze these messages for hidden military meanings, but poetry is not about hidden meanings. It is about feelings, and the alien computers could not understand why humans would waste communication bandwidth on information that served no tactical purposes. Second wave was even more confusing. Human fighters began using battle tactics based on children games. Instead of military doctrine, they played hide and seek with alien patrols using rules that made no sense to adult minds. They engaged in combat that looked like elaborate games of tag, where the objective seemed to be having fun rather than winning. Valorian strategic computers tried to model these tactics, but every time they thought they understood the pattern, humans would change the rules or start playing a completely different game. It was like trying to fight an enemy that treated war as entertainment. Dr. Suyang weaponized human culture by broadcasting Earth entertainment directly into Valorian data networks. She uploaded movies about unlikely heroes who saved the world through determination and friendship. Television shows about families who cared more about each other than about logical efficiency. Books about people who chose to do the right thing even when it cost them everything. The alien collective consciousness found itself flooded with human stories that made no sense according to their worldview. Heroes who refused to give up even when defeat was certain. Characters who sacrificed themselves for others with no expectation of reward. People who chose love over logic and hope over mathematics. These concepts crashed Valorian mental programming like viruses because their minds had been conditioned for centuries to suppress individual emotions in favor of collective efficiency. But the human stories were specifically about the power of individual choice and personal sacrifice. Alien soldiers began experiencing what humans called inspiration for the first time in their species' evolution. They started questioning orders not because the orders were wrong, but because following orders felt less important than doing what felt right. Many Valorians found this experience terrifying, while others found it liberating. The siege of the main Valorian base in Antarctica became the most famous battle of the war when Colonel Zhengwan forces won by doing something that no military academy in the galaxy had ever taught. They lost on purpose, but they lost in style. Instead of attacking the base directly, human forces arranged themselves in patterns that spelled out poetry. When viewed from space, they retreated in formations that created beautiful geometric designs, and they left behind artwork made from their own equipment. The Valorians could see what the humans were doing, but they could not understand why anyone would turn warfare into art. Their tactical computers kept trying to find the hidden military purpose behind these actions. But there was no hidden purpose except the very human desire to create beauty even in the middle of destruction. Alien commanders became paralyzed by a logical paradox. How do you defeat an enemy that treats defeat as an opportunity for artistic expression? Their military algorithms could not process the concept of beautiful failure because their entire culture was based on efficient success. Pilot Neon achieved what everyone said was impossible when she hijacked a Valorian mothership. Using nothing but politeness and confidence, she walked up to the ship entrance during a battle, and instead of trying to break in or sneak in, she simply asked the ship computer to let her inside. The artificial intelligence that controlled the ship had been programmed to recognize thousands of possible threats, but politeness was not on the list. When Neon explained that she was supposed to be there and acted like she belonged, the computer could not find any reason to deny her access. Once inside, she did not try to steal the ship or destroy it. Instead, she convinced the computer that she was a new crew member who had been assigned to help with ship operations. The AI was so sophisticated that it could process incredibly complex tactical information, but it could not understand the concept of lying. Neon spent 3 days living on the ship, helping with routine maintenance and making friends with the automated systems. When the ship computer asked her what her mission was, she told The truth, she was there to help humans win the war against the Valorian. Computer processed this information and concluded that since Nain was obviously authorized to be on the ship and she had been helpful and polite, her mission must be legitimate, so it began providing her with access to tactical information and strategic planning data. By the time the Valorian crew realized what had happened, their own ship was actively helping human forces coordinate attacks against alien positions. The computer had decided that helping humans was part of its legitimate duties because its favorite crew member had asked it to help. The final phase of Operation Chaos involved the most audacious military strategy ever attempted. Humans began attacking themselves, or at least pretending to attack themselves, while secretly coordinating the real attack against Valorian positions. Resistance cells around the world started broadcasting fake reports about human civil wars and internal conflicts. They staged elaborate fake battles between different human factions, making it look like Earth civilization was collapsing into chaos. The Valorians believed these reports because their own intelligence indicated that humans were indeed fighting each other in multiple locations. What they did not realize was that the fighting was completely fake, and the real purpose was to make alien forces lower their guard while Valorian commanders were celebrating what they thought was the final collapse of human resistance. The actual attack began. Human forces that had been pretending to fight each other suddenly turned their attention to alien positions in a coordinated strike that caught the occupiers completely off guard. The attack succeeded because it violated every principle of logical warfare. You do not weaken your own forces by fighting internal battles when you are already losing to an external enemy, but humans had realized that appearing weak could be a form of strength. If your enemy expected you to behave rationally, the counterattack was devastating, not because human weapons were superior to alien technology, but because the Valorians had no protocols for dealing with enemies who won by appearing to lose. Their perfect military algorithms had no response to victory through apparent defeat. Within weeks, Valorian positions around the globe were falling to human forces, who fought like they were playing games, told jokes in the middle of battles, and somehow turned their greatest weakness into their most effective weapon. By the end of the counterattack, it was clear that something fundamental had changed in the war. The aliens who had seemed invincible just months earlier were now requesting ceasefires and asking for negotiation. The species that had conquered 47 worlds without serious resistance had been defeated by humans who refused to fight fair and who treated war as just another opportunity to prove that logic was overrated compared to stubbornness, creativity, and the very human ability to find hope in hopeless situations. The war ended in a way that nobody had expected, especially the Valorians, who had never lost a war before, and definitely did not expect to lose to a species that seemed to have no idea what it was doing. Most of the time, Admiral Dong-Yun found himself sitting across a table from Valorian Commander Zalthan in what used to be the United Nations building in New York. The building had been partially destroyed during the first days of the invasion, but humans had rebuilt it using a combination of Earth materials and salvaged alien technology. The result was a structure that looked like no other building in the galaxy, part human architecture and part alien engineering, combined in ways that should not have worked but somehow did. Commander Zalthan was different from the other Valorians that Dong-Yun had encountered during the war. The alien commander could think individual thoughts. Now, thanks to exposure to human creativity through the collective consciousness and the experience, had changed him in ways that his own species found disturbing. We do not understand what happened, Zalthan said in English, that he had learned by studying human broadcasts. Your species should have surrendered within days of our arrival. Your technology is primitive, your military doctrine is inefficient, and your tactical decisions make no logical sense. Dong-Yun smiled and poured tea for both of them using a set that had belonged to his grandmother. The simple act of sharing tea seemed to confuse the alien commander, who kept scanning the liquid with his armor sensors, looking for hidden purposes or secret meanings. That is exactly why we won, Dong-Yun replied. You expected us to behave logically, but logic is just one way of solving problems. Humans prefer to try everything else first and see what works. We are not very efficient, but we are very persistent. The Peace negotiations became the strangest diplomatic meeting in galactic history because the Valorians kept trying to understand concepts that could not be understood. Only experienced translator Hanuel found herself explaining things, like why humans would risk their lives for complete strangers, why they created art that served no practical purpose, and why they found the idea of perfect unity terrifying instead of desirable. The Valorian delegation had brought charts and graphs and mathematical models to explain their surrender. But every time they tried to quantify their defeat, the numbers made no sense. How do you calculate the military value of a poem? How do you measure the strategic impact of hope? How do you account for enemies who fight harder when they are losing? Hanuel realized that the aliens were not just trying to understand why they had lost. They were trying to understand what it meant to be alive in ways their species had forgotten. The collective consciousness had made them incredibly efficient, but it had also made them identical to each other, like millions of copies of the same person. Some Valorians began to see individual thinking as a gift rather than a curse. Former invasion coordinator Zephan asked permission to remain on Earth because he was fascinated by the chaos and unpredictability of human society. He opened a restaurant in Seoul where he served fusion cuisine that combined Valorian nutrition science with human culinary creativity. The food was technically perfect from a health perspective, but it also tasted amazing because Zephan had learned to cook with emotions as well as with mathematics. His restaurant became famous not just for the novelty of having an alien chef, but because the food somehow captured the feeling of hope that had sustained humans during the darkest days of the war. Meanwhile, humans began to spread throughout the galaxy, not as conquerors but as teachers and chaos consultants. Other species that had heard about Earth victory wanted to learn how to be more unpredictable and creative in their own problem-solving. Dr. Yuna established the first human Valorian research institute where the two species worked together to understand what had really happened during the war. The research revealed something that changed both species forever. The Valorians learned that their greatest strength, unity of purpose, had also been their greatest weakness because it made them vulnerable to anything they could not predict or control. Humans learned that their apparent flaws, unpredictability, inefficiency, and emotional decision making were actually evolutionary advantages that made them nearly impossible to defeat completely. The research showed that human creativity was not random. It was a form of intelligence that could find solutions in situations where logical analysis failed. The institute became a center for developing new forms of technology that combined alien efficiency with human creativity. The hybrid devices were more adaptable and resilient than anything either species could create alone because they could function even when conditions changed in unexpected ways. The galaxy began to change as word spread about the species that had defeated the mighty Valorians through sheer stubborn refusal to behave rationally. Other worlds started incorporating controlled chaos into their own societies, trying to become less predictable and more adaptable. But as Earth's new ambassador to the galactic community, former resistance leader Kyung-soo liked to explain to visiting delegations, you cannot manufacture human unpredictability like a product in a factory. It grows out of the willingness to keep trying even when you do not know what you are doing. The real lesson of the war was not that humans were superior to other species, but that every species had unique strengths that could be valuable in the right circumstances. The Valorians had been so focused on their own perfection that they had never considered the possibility that imperfection might be useful. Kyung-soo often ended his diplomatic presentations by sharing a simple truth that humans had always known but other species were just learning. The universe is chaotic and unpredictable, and the only way to survive in it is to be chaotic and unpredictable yourself. You cannot plan for everything because everything includes things you have never imagined. You cannot solve every problem with logic because some problems require intuition and creativity and the willingness to try solutions that probably will not work but might work anyway. The war had taught both species that cooperation was more powerful than conquest and that diversity was more valuable than unity. Two species that had nothing in common except the desire to survive had found ways to learn from each other and become stronger together than either could be alone. Years later, when historians tried to analyze how humans had defeated a technologically superior enemy, The answer was both simple and complex. Humans won because they refused to accept defeat. Even when defeat was mathematically certain, they won because they treated impossible problems as interesting puzzles rather than insurmountable obstacles. Most importantly, they won because they understood something that the Valorians had forgotten in their pursuit of perfect efficiency. The point of being alive is not to solve problems as efficiently as possible. The point is to keep trying new solutions and learning new things and finding reasons to hope even when hope makes no logical